Reading coaches, literacy coaches, I think both of those terms are used somewhat synonymously in the profession, but reading coaches are probably one of the most recent experiments we've engaged in professional development for improving teaching and student achievement. So how do they help? How are they improving? Well, much like an athletic coach, reading coaches are another set of eyes to help someone who is learning how to teach children effectively reflect on their practice in a way that informs them so that they can get better. Most teachers understand what it's like to be in the trenches and to teach day to day and to just keep their head above water, let alone have the time to sit around and ruminate about how effective their practice was in the classroom. As a consequence, what happens very often is that if there is improvement in teaching, it's fairly incremental and very long-term. Just because the reality is teachers don't have the time in their lives to reflect on their own practice. They're saddled with so many other responsibilities. Now, reading coaches can come in and in a fairly brief period of time watch the teacher teach and help them through the same kinds of techniques that an athletic coach would use to show them what they're doing well and to help them to understand things that they might be able to do better, opportunities that were missed, explanations that weren't clear, steps that were omitted in providing instruction that is crystal clear and explicit for students to be able to follow. So coaches provide that same kind of feedback loop and mechanism. In addition, they provide the opportunity for teachers to see someone else perhaps model it. Coaches, really effective coaches, don't just critique teachers. They also enter the classroom when asked to do so and model for teachers what it is that they are trying to help them do that's better in their instruction. So in a very real way, they serve the same kind of role that any other coach does in an athletic arena, and that is to help the teachers to assess what they're doing well and to help them get better at what they want to do better. Of course, the end goal is to help children, and that's why we need coaches. If we could just pick the good athletes or pick the good teachers and throw them onto the field or into the classroom and be successful, we would have done that. This is just another experimental form of professional development support for teachers. And most of the studies that have been done, at least recently, on literacy coaches and their impact on teachers have shown fairly dramatic effects on influencing teachers' practice in ways that cause real improvement and real change in the classroom, which translates into student achievement. With the downfalls or pitfalls that might come around with literacy coaches, the issues that I've seen that are most problematic are a couple. One, and these usually relate to how they are viewed by their administrator in the building. Sometimes the administrator confuses the role of a literacy or reading coach with that of a reading specialist or a clinician, and that their role should be actually working directly with children and improving children's reading. That's a problem. That's not the role of a coach. The role of a coach is to help the teacher get better and working directly with adults. So when you become a literacy coach or a reading coach, you really have to have the knowledge that a clinician has, but you have to have additional knowledge layered on top of that about how to work with adults and helping them get better and teachers get better at reading instruction in the classroom. So that's one of the problems. We get this confused role sometimes. And the other problem I see is that the principals very often will see literacy coaches, because they're freed up from the demands of the classroom, as potential assistant principals to sort of pick up the pieces when the principal's out of the building and attending workshops or attending meetings at the central office. They want to let some of those duties fall to the reading coach. And that can militate against their effectiveness as coaches when they're taking out of the role of helping teachers and taking on quasi-administrative roles. So really, I think the biggest pitfalls for a reading coach in a school relate to how they are viewed by the faculty and the administration, and having real clarity about what it is they're supposed to be doing when they're in the school. That they're there to help kids, not to help kids, but to help teachers, and that's their role. Doing study groups with teachers, watching them teach, providing models, helping them look at data and understand how to help students, but not to do the principal's job, and not to do the job of the reading specialist or the reading clinician. Well, specifically to be a good literacy coach, you, I think, need to have some experience working with children. That's indispensable. You have to have some experience, and what I'm often seeing with reading coaches is that some coaches are brought out of the classroom at relatively inexperienced levels, and I think that's damaging for the reading coach, because they don't know enough about children and teaching yet, and they consequently don't carry the respect of their peers. But in terms of coursework, I think in the state of Utah we have an endorsement program, and a level 1 endorsement with the 21 credit hours and 7 courses provides a fairly good foundation for the beginnings of a reading or literacy coach. They also need some work and understanding of how to work with adults in educational settings. Because they're not working directly with children, they're working with adults. And that can be quite a challenge for a teacher who's used to handling 6 or 7-year-olds, and now all of a sudden they're supposed to be able to handle a passive-aggressive teacher who doesn't really want to learn what they're being asked to learn, or handle a pair of teachers who don't get along well and won't communicate in a study group. So they need some skills in working with adults. There's no two ways about that one. And ultimately, I think it would be well for them to have the level 2 reading endorsement, where they, understand a bit more about reading research. They understand how to work with and administer reading programs in schools, and the big picture. And so those would be some things that I would look for, and the experiential business of being in the classroom long enough at enough levels that they can really provide understanding of how to help children at different levels with different kinds of learning characteristics. What makes for an effective literacy coach or reading coach? First and foremost is the ability to remain focused and stay organized. There are 100 different priorities that will tug away at a reading coach, and some of those are important and some are not. The ability to prioritize what's important and staying focused on that will largely determine the success of a reading coach. So, someone's going to want them to look up their books for them and fill out their order forms. Well, maybe that is an important thing for a reading coach or a literacy coach to do, but I suspect it's not top of the list. So being able to actually prioritize what is important in that role, and what is important in that role is spending time in the classrooms, working directly with teachers and improving their instruction and their understanding of how to work with kids so that they will improve. And if that focus is clear and they organize around that, that will keep them, that'll make them more successful than coaches I see getting dissipated by the multiple tuggings and tug-of-wars that are out there wanting their time and their ability. It's too easy to get off task as a reading coach. What are some things that make them ineffective? Well, of course, the obvious is that a reading coach who allows themselves to be sort of pulled off into administrative duties or off into duties that the special education teacher or the reading clinician or the Title I teacher ought to be taking care of, that's a problem. It dilutes and dissipates the effectiveness of the reading coach and the role that is there to improve teacher instruction. And so, again, being organized, staying focused, and prioritizing are going to be the key factors that make you successful, and failing to do those things will be the key factors that will unravel your success as a reading coach. Well, the first thing is that the principal is an experienced elementary school teacher. They understand the territory. The second is that they have a knowledge of reading and reading instruction. There is no substitute for that. And it's a very unfortunate circumstance we find ourselves in this state, unlike some other states where the principal licensure or certification requires no work in reading supervision. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that fixed. Or at least changed so that superintendents and principals both have at least one course in the administration and supervision of school reading programs. I think that's critical. If they're unable to do that, I'd like to see principals have at least the understanding of a level 1 reading endorsed teacher. The other thing that makes a very effective school leader is on-the-ground involvement with the improvement of reading instruction. That means that when reform efforts are brought into schools or innovations are undertaken in schools relative to reading instruction, that principal is the real leader, not just a figurehead, but they're in the classrooms with the reading coach observing instruction, with people who come in from the outside to provide technical assistance or professional development workshops. They attend those right along with their staff. They keep up to date on what the teachers need to know so that the teachers respect that they understand what it is they're supposed to understand about improving reading instruction. And then, of course, there's the ability to talk to teachers, to be both a friend and a critic. And that's not easy. It takes a very artful set of skills combined in one individual to both let a teacher know how well they're doing and what makes them a good teacher, and then also to be able to tell them how they can improve without offending them. Teaching is an immensely personal undertaking, and when you start to critique one's teaching, it's very often hard for the teacher to separate themselves from the teaching. And good principals can talk about teaching and separate that out for teachers and talk about it as an object of discussion and study without it becoming personal. The best principals I've worked with have been knowledgeable. They're skilled administrators. They're also skilled classroom teachers. And they have a disposition that invites an openness and a real caring for people. And I think you put all that together, the knowledge and the skills and the disposition to work well with people, and I think you get an effective principal. There are a number. One of them is fads. Principals and leaders of literacy are asked to attend a lot of workshops and a lot of in-service and a lot of professional development. And one of the problems is they get, something new at every one of those, and it keeps piling on the plate. And we come back, and we're always wanting to change things. And that's how teachers feel. They feel like an ineffective literacy leader is one who's always got the newest and best thing on the street, and we're supposed to do it now. Where I just think that's not a good thing, to just keep continuing to import new ideas and filling the plate to the point where things are falling off of it. I think the good principals are the ones who keep focus again on the most important essentials of good reading instruction and continue to refine that rather than get off onto tangents. Other problems that leaders run into, both coaches and principals, are getting attracted away too often from the school and from the classrooms, so that they're spending more time off-site and away from the teachers and the children than they are on-site. And there's a huge temptation to do that because there's plenty of opportunities, but staying on-site and staying focused on helping the school and the teachers get better, I think are really, really important. Those are the biggest threats. Just getting, again, derailed from the main focus. So that's what I'd say. Planning a district reading program, if I were in charge of that, my first step is always going to be diagnosis or assessment. I want to know what it is that my students can do and do well, and what they can't do and do well, and in terms of literacy, whether it's reading or writing. And I also want to know about my teachers. So I want to diagnose their abilities. And that's how I'd always start, is from a good, solid basis of assessment. What is it the kids need? What is it the teachers need? And you need to get that information by observing them, testing them, and getting reliable data to move from. And then from there, once you have that, then you start to match your needs against particular tools and materials that you can use to sort of plug the holes. I think every good school reading program should have at its core a published reading program, or one that is homegrown, that has a solid scope and sequence of skills and strategies that are going to be taught. Without that, you just have pandemonium in a reading program. You have everybody doing their own thing in their own way, and there's no way to assess or improve pandemonium. So getting a good program that matches up with the needs that you've identified in the teachers and the students, and then doing a clear and careful analysis of that program for its weaknesses, and then running it for a year and see what it does for the kids and the teachers and where are the holes there, and then backing up and looking for supplementary help for the teachers and the children where that program may not be as strong as you'd like it to be, would be another thing that I would undertake. And then constant data collection, data monitoring, and undertaking of slight tweaks and interventions, and making sure that those interventions are effective, really relying heavily on a response to intervention model. But core reading program, assessing teachers and students, evaluating the program over time, plugging the holes in the program with supplementary materials that make sense where that program's weak or the instruction isn't effective, and then constant data monitoring to make sure that what we're doing is effective for children. Those would be the key hallmarks of what I'd be after. First thing I'd be looking for is, and you just can't replace these two things, I think. Number one, can they work with others? The business of creating an effective school-wide literacy program is the work of a faculty. It's not the work of an individual. And so I would look for key interpersonal characteristics that say that this person can work well with others. Play nice in the sandbox, as we say in kindergarten. Play nice with others and get along and learn and help and assist and be a support to colleagues. Second thing is, there's no substitute for knowledge base. Teachers have to know what they need to know about the reading process and how to teach children to read. And so they need to have evidence of the fact that they know that information. And probably the next thing I'd look for is evidence, some kind of evidence that they could bring to bear that they're effective in being able to implement the knowledge that they have in the classroom and engage and enact that knowledge with children so that it benefits children in ways that we want it to, really raises reading achievement and reading engagement. Those would be the key things I look for. One of the areas that I'm most concerned about, that I see as a deficit in our preparation of teachers, coaches, principals, the whole educational professional group that we're talking about in schools, is the lack of understanding that most of these individuals have relative to psychometrics and tests and measurements. There's a very, very thin knowledge base that's provided to teachers and to administrators and to coaches in this state in our teacher preparation institutions. I don't care which ones you're talking about. The issues of reliability and validity and how tests are made and how they're to be interpreted and how they're used and what goes into them and how to develop an understanding and communicate test results to parents and to others, how to properly delimit what conclusions can be drawn from the tests. This is a whole area where I think we have an enormous deficit. Another area that I think is really lacking and one I'd like to see is that at the undergraduate teacher preparation level, we get some research coursework involved. Teachers do not get a research class or even a real exposure to what research methodology is all about until they go into a master's program, and there are a good number of teachers who don't go there. And so to expect teachers to be research-based and to understand how to use the research to inform their instruction without any work at the undergraduate level on research methodology and how to read and understand and consume research, I think is just a terrible oversight in our current teacher preparation and administrator preparation programs that we need to address immediately. So those two big holes really give me heartburn as a literacy teacher educator, that teachers and administrators don't know much about tests and measurements, and they don't know much about research and research methodology. Those two deficits will keep you from being able to really use assessment effectively to inform your instruction, and the other will really keep you from using research effectively to inform your instruction. If you have neither of those in place, all you have is craft wisdom that's passed to you by previous practitioners, and that may be good and it may be bad for kids, and I think we can do better. One of the characteristics of the most effective reading teachers is the ability to be explicit in their instruction. Now there are various ways to define explicit instruction, but I think for the most part, teachers in Utah have been taught that first it starts with you as the teacher explaining and modeling what it is you want students to do, and then at some point involving students and sharing that responsibility over a period of scaffolded guided practice, and to the point where the students take that responsibility, that skill, task, or strategy or concept, and make it their own and can do it independently. The work of becoming an explicit teacher is the work of a professional lifetime. I in no way want to send out the message that it's either easy or quick. There is no quick and there is no easy fix for becoming an explicit teacher. It is hard work, and it requires a great deal of professional and personal discipline to become an explicit teacher. One of the first steps that when I work with teachers is that I tell them they need to write their lesson plans out. And I know that kind of scripting really offends some people, but I can tell you you're much more polished when you've taken the time to reflectively sit and think about how you're going to say something and the words that you're going to use to say it, and then write that out, than when you just fly from the seat of your pants. That does not make you a good teacher. So I really believe that explicit instruction is one of the most important and most long-term efforts that we need to be engaged in helping teachers at the level of professional development. It is very hard work, it's complex work, and once you get one thing really explicit and well taught, like maybe fluency or phonics, learning how to do that with another skill or strategy is almost like learning to do it all over again. And so it's really difficult work, and I can't say enough about how important it is, because the research is there very clear that explicit instruction helps children particularly children who are at risk. But it's also very, very hard, and there's a lot of support that's needed. You think you're explicit, then you check it with kids or somebody else who's listened to what you've done, and you find all kinds of gaps in their understanding because you weren't as clear and as complete as you might have been. And so explicit instruction is key.